Hello, and welcome to the Bozeman Beat, the City of Bozeman's podcast where we have real conversations about issues our city cares about. I'm Mayor Joey Morrison, the host of this podcast, and I'm chatting with people across the community to shed light on things the city is involved in and things we may not be, but are still important to our residents. Our topic today comes from a listener who wanted to hear more about what the city is doing when it comes to public transportation, a conversation that we have often at City Hall and with our partners. It's no secret that we're a growing city with a lot of people commuting into Bozeman to go to work, to go to school, or to shop in our city. Bozeman is going to continue being an economic hub for the area, so we must think about not just serving our own residents and their transportation needs, but our local commuters and visitors as well. To help me discuss this topic and our transportation future, I have with me today Nick Ross, City of Bozeman Transportation and Engineering Director. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get started, could you just tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, what your job is, and maybe something that might surprise our listeners?
Absolutely. So first off, thank you, Mayor Morrison, for the time, and to our listener for asking such a great question. So I am Nick Ross. I serve the city as our first Director of Transportation and Engineering, which I'm extremely excited to get the opportunity to sort of pick up and lead a new department for the city that's specifically focused on transportation. Part of my duties here cover the engineering division and the streets division, some of the more nuts and bolts parts of the city, but also I get to oversee the hosting of our Gallatin Valley Metropolitan Planning Organization. So that's a regional planning organization that we host here at the city, but execute in partnership with county and transit and Belgrade partners. And it bleeds right into our topic of conversation today. So interesting things about me. I came to the city after serving as the Chief Traffic Engineer and Traffic Bureau Manager for the city of Pittsburgh. And so go Bucks, go Pens, Stanley Cup Finals. And at the allowance of Mayor Morrison, I'll also admit that I, as my fun fact, I guess, that I used to follow the band Phish on tour. And have seen them over 80 times.
80 times?
Yeah.
What did following them mean? How far were you willing to?
I believe I'm up to 16 states. So both coasts, up and down. I've seen them in Texas, which is cool. Not exactly the kind of band you think about seeing in Texas, but it's a fun way to see the country.
Yeah, it's a default followership, and I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing a taste on the podcast.
Yeah.
So now all of our listeners will know.
That's it.
A little vulnerable chunk about Nick Ross. So our show today, we're really just going to be having a conversation together about this big bucket that is public transportation. We might cover and meander through what do we have right now? Why do cities provide public transportation? How does it fit into a city's plan as it's growing? And how do we make it work for everyone? So I think just as we're starting, from your department's perspective, what are our goals? How are we trying to expand our public transportation infrastructure, and what are the ways that we go about trying to make that infrastructure as accessible as possible?
Getting right into it. It's a great start. So let's start by talking a little bit about fundamentals. What makes a good transit system? And at the start, what is a successful transit system? So Mayor Morrison, turn the tables on you. Would you agree that a sign of success for a transit system would be how many people it moves?
I mean, that's got to be one of the benchmarks, right? Because it's one way for us to see who's using it. Have we put it in the right spot? Are we serving people's needs? Because if nobody's using it, then how do we know we're spending money well?
Absolutely.
And developing things the right way?
And just about any technical expert you'd ask would have service or ridership, especially as a percentage of overall trips a city takes, right up there at the top in terms of how successful a transit system, a public transit system is in serving its residents. And so now that we've defined a little bit about success at a high level, we can also talk about places that are successful, places that have successfully moved a good many people with their public transit system. And when you look at those comparables, as a city like Bozeman, who is growing and seeks to improve our transit service, you have to start to make connections between what these types of cities look like. What would you guess, Mayor Morrison, is just about the one defining feature of cities with successful transit system?
Putting stops near major housing infrastructure where people are living, rather than where people, maybe are just recreating.
And I'll back you up even one more fundamental step in that process by using population density as one of the top, if not the top, key connections between all successful transit cities. So if you look at all cities with transit systems that serve, say, 10%, even 10% of their trips, the defining feature of all those cities that have with one another is that they have allowed the development of their city to build in a traditional manner to a point where it is dense enough to adequately serve those residents with transit. And so when we bring that back to the Bozeman-centric view and talk about what our goals are and what we're doing, we have to first start by always reminding people and reminding ourselves of the connection between land use and transportation.
Yeah.
So from that end, the first thing that we do to serve the goals that we have of improving our transit system, improving our ridership of our transit service, is starting at that land use and land planning perspective. And in making sure that when we make decisions about zoning and development, that we are encouraging at least modest levels of density. Understanding from that perspective, right, from the transit supportive perspective, not to mention many others, that there simply is no such thing in the world, let alone in America, as a highly dependent transit system or highly served transit system that's placed in a city of low-density, sprawling subdivisions. There's just no such thing as those combinations.
Yeah, what is I'm guessing that within these conversations, there is hey, here's the density threshold that you hit before you start seeing those serious returns. Because I think this is a conversation that comes up often where folks are asking me from the policymaking perspective, and I'm sure of you in the administration of these policies perspective is, when is the juice worth the squeeze? How do we know we as a city are ready to do this, knowing that most of the big 8 cities in Montana have some sort of supplemental public transit system, whether it's buses or otherwise. So what is the point at which we start to see, here's when we've made it over the hump into seeing real returns in ridership?
That's an excellent question and excellent metric to track. So nationally, when you start looking at those cities that have a transit system that serves, again, roughly about 10% of their trips, those cities are starting in that 8,000 to 10,000 people per square mile area, okay? Bozeman right now is sitting somewhere around 3,000 people per square mile. So we're still on the relatively lighter end of density per population for heavily used transit cities. What we do have in our favor, though, is a couple things, in my opinion. One, that we are a college town. And so we have, and this is something that's great about Bozeman, but we do have a lot of parks and open space that contributes to that density calculation of people per land area. So the developed parts where we want to serve people are oftentimes actually higher density in pockets than that overall number. And that roughly centers around our downtown area and our university area. And so you can start to then make connections to local connections to a city like Missoula, who has matured to the point where they have a much more robust transit service than we do. They have a lot of those same fundamentals that we have, though. And so as we grow to the point where we're reaching their population thresholds, that they've shown that they can serve with a higher amount and higher quantity of transit and higher number of transit riders served, I think we are on a path to meeting and, frankly, exceeding their ridership.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting to see that comparison. I think Missoula feels so ahead. I mean, they hit their 50,000, the magic number, to get access to the UTD type system. They got that before us. So I think that one of the questions that I have, I get solicitations from, folks around the country that want to come here, want to fly us out to go see a transit system somewhere. And in that is often a question of, so we're at, 3,000 plus people per square mile. We start to see, wow, these systems really start to supplement up to 10% of riders at 8 to 10,000 people per square mile. We're obviously a ways off from that. So what are the options? What's the menu for between those two? Because we're both in this position where we, as these sort of urban densifying communities, that we're not quite so rural, that we need to say, yep, no need to invest in public infrastructure at all, and it's just we're a car-dependent community. You need it to get around. To you can get most of your needs met by just a bus. We're somewhere between those. So what are the tools? What are the things between those two extremes?
It's an excellent question, and unfortunately is the stickiest part of the entire city building or city development process. It's easy if you are so rural or so sprawling that it's just not even going to be worth trying to build out a highly used transit system. It's easy when you are a very dense city where you have no choice but to serve a high number of your residents with something other than single occupancy vehicles. This middle ground where we're at right now, those are the growing pains. That's the puberty period of city growth. So what are the tools we have available to us, right? When you're looking at encouraging folks, getting folks to use transit more, people generally are going to want a safe, frequent, and reliable transit service. And those frequency and reliable numbers, those boil down to how much transit service you operate. And how much service you operate is going to be dictated by how much funding you have available to do it. And so with the UTD now set up, if our community does have goals of expanding transit service, making it more frequent to encourage more folks to ride it, make it more reliable for people to ride, we'll have the opportunity to, at some point in the future, ask that question of our public, of whether or not we want to dedicate some funding directly to the operation of our transit service.
So in sort of that same set of questions, as we're trying to explore what are the options for our community, and I appreciate how you phrase that as having, at a certain point, you have no choice but to try and invest in some sort of public transportation infrastructure because, just building out more and more and more streets, it's just going to get slower. You're just going to get more congested. The only way to really delete cars off of the road is by giving them an alternative to get around. Are there options for us in the meantime to try and incentivize or increase the opportunities for ride sharing infrastructure? I'm not sure what that would look like. I mean, I don't even know how you would insure a vehicle that your neighborhood shares. But I suspect there's other folks that are starting to kind of knock on this door of what do you do in this interim, this sort of liminal space between rural town and urbanized city. And I don't know if that's something that we're already having some conversations about. I don't want to preempt the UTD folks or MPO folks, but I suspect that's on there.
Yeah, and let's first of all, let's shout out Streamline in our urban transportation district, Sunshine Ross, no relation. They do an excellent job serving our community with the resources they have available. And so I don't speak on their behalf, but I am an ardent supporter of everything that they do and actually serving our city and our residents with transit. So you have inadvertently touched on a bit of a lightning rod concept in the transit world, and that is the concept of microtransit. So microtransit is sort of maybe a nerdy term for more of a direct response transit system. So if you think about the most common types of transit, bus or light rail routes, those are generally more fixed line or fixed route transit services. There's a stop. The bus runs the same route every day at the same stops, hopefully at the same times. When you break that down, though, into being more demand responsive, you look at something like a taxi service, right? You call the taxi or you order your Uber, it comes to your house, it takes you where you want to go. There has been a lot of effort in maybe the last decade or so for cities that are sort of in our liminal space of growth that have run a lot of pilots and a lot of studies on whether or not this concept of microtransit, so smaller vehicles, not on a fixed route system,
Right.
But more demand responsive, and if that is that interim space, and without necessarily speaking for the city of Bozeman or for the UTD and our transit operator, I think it is reasonable to summarize some of the results of those trials as saying that they do tend to be on the higher expense side per ride. And so it's hard to find that middle ground where you can share the expense of a service like transit, which is ultimately how you get a cheaper and higher functioning transit system to begin with, is more people riding it along the relatively same lines to the same places and sharing in that cost of service. The more you kind of water that down with microtransit, the harder that becomes to find those efficiencies. It's harder to get two people calling at the same time that are coming from roughly the same place and want to go to roughly the same place. And so while it's a valiant effort and it's very much a tool that could be available to us, particularly on transit-dependent users or riders, those folks that have no choice but to ride transit from a health or wealth perspective. In terms of broad growth and broad expansion, though, microtransit might not necessarily be worth the bang for the buck.
Yeah, that's been when I've gotten solicitations from folks to say, hey, we'll come and be a consultant and we'll help you figure this question out of either microtransit or paratransit from around the country. Looking under the hood, it seems like that's one of the challenges is either you need to designate, this is a parking lot in a high traffic area that is designated specifically for, folks that are driving four-door sedan to park in the middle of the day. And as you do that and you commit millions of dollars in surface parking and things like that, it's almost starting to get to the question of why wouldn't you just invest in more bus routes and more bus stops?
There's a common joke that in the industry that, the sort of the tech sector involvement, no shade on tech sector, but tech sector involvement in transit is sort of like reinventing on first principles the things that we've already understood about highly effective transit systems for generations. And so as all these ideas about tunnels and autonomous vehicles and all those things, all elements of which very much can lead to a highly successful transit system, the fundamentals come down to having a place that is easily served by transit and then establishing, again, safe, frequent, reliable service for those people.
Yeah, it does feel like it speaks to the meme of the tech sector of reinventing things that have worked for a really long time. That I think I've seen one that's somebody, another Silicon Valley person, I think was actually a former Uber executive saying, guys, I've just come up with this great idea. Why don't we buy really high occupancy vehicles and we drive them around to specific high use areas within the city and everybody just pays a small amount to subscribe to that service. And it's like, you just reinvented a bus.
If that's what gets people to ride transit, I'm willing to do call it whatever we want, right? But I think the meme sort of does speak to a lot of reality there.
Yeah. I also, before I just love how beautiful our buses are. The Streamline is just such a cool bus to have something that's covered in like iconic Bozeman landmarks that I think a lot of people don't notice. They don't look close enough to see. It's got the Rialto on there. It's got the Bangtail horse on the side. It's just got this very fun, really contextual feel to even just looking at it. Probably another question that speaks to some of what I suspect members of our community are also going to be grappling with, and that I think we have to think about as policymakers is why even do public transportation at all? How does it benefit the community at large? How does it benefit the city? Why do virtually all communities, certainly outside the United States, move towards public transportation much more aggressively than most American cities do? But still, at the end of the day, most cities in the U.S. move to an inevitability of, whoa, we just have to invest in this. And can you tell us a little about the story of why that is the case?
Yeah. So if we accept that the role of local government is to create the conditions for prosperity, or at least to enable prosperity, and safety for their residents. Then you've got to start kind of looking at what conditions do promote that. And so if we're talking about transportation has long been considered and understood through study after study to be one of, if not the leading factor towards upward economic mobility of any other condition you could put out there. How easily, effectively, and cheaply can you connect people to jobs, to opportunity for advancement in life? Transit fills a gap there for folks that might be unable or, frankly, do not want to carry the expense of owning and operating vehicles. That is typically the second highest expense in anyone's personal budget after housing. Even in a town of significant housing costs like ours, owning and operating a vehicle is exceptionally expensive. And so if you're building the conditions for prosperity and you understand that connecting people to jobs, to where they need to get to, is a fundamental key there, and then providing a service that can do that at the cheapest cost possible is going to get people a long way. That sounds great, but people might be asking, well, I have a car, right? Or quite frankly, maybe don't necessarily have an interest in serving folks who are looking to get a leg up. The easily defendable fact is that high transit use benefits every single person on the street. And that breaks down when you start considering person on the bus does not need someplace to park. Everything surrounding city growth almost always eventually leads back to parking, right?
To cars.
To cars. It's not necessarily density that people don't like, right? It is sometimes what the buildings look like, and oftentimes how much of the street gets taken up with cars when a place does densify. Now, that's also a little bit of a red herring because some of the most awful urban environments you're going to ever be in are downtowns of Sunbelt cities in America who are surrounded by low-density sprawl, but only induces, therefore, more auto use. So every driver on the road that chooses not to take transit, chooses to drive, is going to benefit eventually from more people taking that opportunity, more people getting by foot, by bike, by transit. That's less parking demand, that's less travel demand, less road capacity that gets taken up by people that would otherwise be in a car like everybody else.
Yeah, it's speaks to another sort of, quintessential adage that I hear at times where folks are, sitting on 19th and cars moving really slow and they're saying, what's with all this traffic? And it's like, you are part of the traffic. As we're sitting in our cars driving around, the only thing that we can do to slow things down is either we find an alternative to get off the road or other people do. There's really, the almost quintessential road transportation joke of, just one more lane is going to fix this. Right. That I think that sometimes we hear from folks where, it's, I think folks are often shocked at how expensive it is to build roads. And it doesn't necessarily just pencil out to, removing cars from the road or moving congestion just to make the road wide.
That's it. And there's really a connection there too, right? So especially a surface transit system like a bus, primarily bus system, buses need roads too. And so there's a combination, or there's efficiency to be had there as a city does grow and does densify with building sort of that minimum grid, that concept that we have in Bozeman of developing like a traditional American city of connected blocks and street grids that will allow for future growth into a type of city where transit can run effectively, right? Transit, the more circuitous a bus route is, the longer it's going to take and the less reliable it's going to be. And so if a city, like many American cities have, builds out in a way that does not connect people to one another, connect different parts of the city to where people want to be, those are never going to be the fundamental conditions where a successful transit system is going to operate.
Sure. I think I'd also just add to the who benefits when we invest in this. And I liked your piece of saying, one of the things, and I think it's a similar belief that I have in what local government is meant to do, which is to encourage prosperity and remove barriers for folks to create opportunity. And knowing what we know, that is cities, that I think I see most of the decisions that we're tasked with making, the tallest order of decisions we're making out of City Hall, out of the City Commission room on a Tuesday night, relate to public safety and public health. That I think really all of our decisions are really about public health and public safety. And when we create opportunities for folks to get around in different ways, right? We're taking cars off the road, and of course that's reducing the number of total vehicles that are transporting around that are particles for potential collision.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, we know that these have so many public health benefits to not spending as much time driving in cars, that it means as we allow folks to choose from a more diverse menu of tools to get around the community, that makes us more prosperous, and prosperous cities are safer cities. And I think about that as one of the metrics every Tuesday night when we're making decisions, is that these are really about safety and it's about public health.
Yep.
And it's tough to always translate everything into those terms each time.
Mm-hmm. And if it sounds like, Mayor Morrison and myself are on the same page, like we're on the same page here, very much that is by design, right? So again, from a fundamental governance perspective, we are a city commission, city manager form of government. So policymakers like your mayor, like Mayor Morrison, set the policy for the city that people like me as staff are responsible for executing. And so to be in alignment from the staff and commission level with priorities and policies that we have is fundamental to the success of our city like Bozeman.
Yeah. Another question that we get often that's maybe aspirational. It's hard to sometimes imagine, this is, several years or a decade or decades out of some sort of passenger rail. Either, something that goes throughout the whole state, which is obviously a little bit too big for us. That's other people have to make those decisions. But even just the hypothetical question of, we know thousands of people each day get in their cars in Bozeman, get in their cars in Belgrade, get in their cars in the county or in Big Sky, and sort of play a game of musical chairs and go to each other's community for work, for school, for play. Why not just say, okay, we want to take all of those as opportunities to say, let's put a light rail from Bozeman to the airport, to the schools, to the city of Belgrade and back and forth. Like, what are the barriers that get in the way?
Flashing?
Assuming it's quite cheap.
Two of the most common questions I get are, why does every intersection have the dumb flashing yellow arrows and not the dedicated green arrows? And when are we going to build light rail? Light rail is great. Light rail is fun to ride, right now in America, it tends to cost in the range of $150 to $250 million per mile to build. $150 to $250 million per mile are loose current day estimates for the construction of light rail. So when we talk about barriers,
that sounds like one.
It's hard not to start there, right? And so that starts then to ask what I think is probably the better question, if you don't mind, of how do we better promote the humble bus? Mm-hmm. Because there's absolutely nothing that a well-designed bus rapid transit system can do for a city of our size, for a region of our size, that light rail can. They can have a bus rapid transit system that operates in dedicated right-of-way, right, on some of our higher capacity streets, that has a frequent schedule, clean stations with very accessible buses on it, and very well-designed buses can absolutely serve the same number of people with equal level of service with far, far, far lower cost to our taxpayers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like almost the quintessential we need to eat our dinner before we get to dessert kind of thing. It's obviously a tax-based question that is a long way out from really any city in Montana being able to support something like that.
Yeah, there's a fun hypothetical to think about of, if we did not at one point move towards automobiles. So many of our cities had a
Right.
streetcar system. You can look at old plans of the city of Bozeman and look at what streets the original streetcar system went down. But even when we're talking about, okay, if we can't afford light rail, what about streetcar? I also think streetcar is super fun. They tend to be more economic development type drivers, though,
Right.
than strong transit services. And so again, we kind of keep getting back to the principle, right? That we can serve people effectively with the bus in a way, though, that is very dignified for everybody.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point. And I didn't take it as a challenge to say, hey, why are you even asking about light rail? But as we're wrapping up here, I just really want to thank you so much for this conversation. It was really great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Mayor Morrison.
And before we wrap, I also want to give a similar shout out to our folks at the UTD and the MPO. Jeff Butts and Sunshine Ross are forces of nature, and we're really lucky to have them as such stalwart stewards of this type of work. And thank you as well to listeners. As you heard in this episode, you can always write in to podcast@bozemanmt.gov with your thoughts and ideas, and we love to see them. We will catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Bozeman Beat. If you enjoy listening to this show, please help us out by sharing this episode with a friend or rating and reviewing our show on whichever podcast app you use. If you have feedback, questions, or a suggestion for a future topic you'd like to hear us discuss, please email us at podcast@bozemanmt.gov. That's podcast@bozemanmt, as in Montana.gov. Hope to see you in the next episode.